All right, so you've sent in some really interesting stuff on Nietzsche.
Yeah.
And looks like you're ready to go a little bit deeper with him.
Absolutely.
So we're not just going to talk about, like what is the death of God,
Right.
but really try to explore, why is this guy still someone that we're talking about over a century later?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's what we'll try to get to the bottom of. We can unpack some of these big concepts, like you said, the death of God, the Übermensch, eternal recurrence, and see if there's something there that can speak to us now.
Now, before we get into all the really crazy stuff, can you just give us a little bit of background on who Nietzsche was and why he was such a rebel in the world of philosophy?
Yeah, so imagine 19th century Germany, kind of a time of massive upheaval, both socially and intellectually.
Oh, yeah.
Traditional beliefs were being challenged. Science was on the rise. And Nietzsche was already something of an outsider, but he really jumped right into the middle of all of this turmoil. He wasn't your typical professor, though. His writing is very sharp, aphoristic, almost like he's trying to provoke you with every sentence.
So no long, boring arguments, more like just like zingers.
Exactly. Like, take this line from Twilight of the Idols. What does not kill me makes me stronger.
Ooh, I like that one.
Right. It's powerful. And it gets right to the heart of his philosophy, this idea of embracing challenges, overcoming hardship.
When you put it like that, I can already see why his ideas are still relevant today. We're all about self-improvement, pushing boundaries, becoming the best versions of ourselves.
Absolutely.
It's like Nietzsche was tapping into something very fundamental about human nature, or the human spirit.
I think you're right about that.
Oh.
But before we get too far, let's go back to one of his most famous and often, I think, misunderstood ideas, the death of God.
Yeah, that's the one that always gets everyone's attention.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty bold statement. I'm guessing it caused quite a stir back then.
It certainly did. People thought he was saying that God had literally died, which in a way he was, but not in a physical sense.
Right.
What he was talking about was the decline of a particular belief system, this idea that God is the ultimate authority on morality, truth, and meaning.
Okay, so it's less about a literal death and more about a shift in our perspective, a way of seeing the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nietzsche saw that in a world increasingly dominated by science and individual freedom, that this traditional foundation was crumbling. And that was a very frightening thought for a lot of people.
I can imagine if you take that away, what are you left with? It's kind of like pulling the rug out from underneath everything.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point he's making. He's not just trying to be shocking.
Right.
He's pointing out a fundamental shift in human consciousness. And he's asking what happens when we no longer have that external source of meaning.
So what does he propose we do? Just wander around in this nihilistic void?
No, not at all. This is where Nietzsche gets really interesting. He sees the death of God not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity.
Okay, I like that.
An opportunity for what he calls a revaluation of all values.
A revaluation of all values. Now that sounds ambitious. Maybe a little dangerous. Does this mean we just throw out everything we know about right and wrong?
It's not about rejecting morality altogether, but about questioning where our values come from, what purpose they serve, and whether they're truly life-affirming.
Okay, so how do we go about this revaluation? Does he give us a new set of commandments or something?
That would be far too simple for Nietzsche.
Yeah.
He's all about individual responsibility, so he doesn't give you the answers he wants to force you to come up with your own answers. And that leads us to his concept of the Übermensch.
Ah, yes, the Übermensch. This is the one that always makes me think of Superman.
I understand that.
So is this some kind of superhuman being with extraordinary powers?
Not exactly. It's more a concept of human potential.
Okay.
This idea that someone can transcend the limitations of conventional morality and create their own values.
Okay, so not Superman, but someone who's really good at being human?
You could say that the Übermensch is driven by what Nietzsche calls the will to power.
Okay, that's another one of those phrases that can sound a bit intimidating. Can you break that down for us? What did he mean by will to power?
Yeah, it's often misinterpreted as this desire to dominate others, but that's not really what Nietzsche had in mind.
Yeah.
He saw it as a fundamental drive in all living things to grow, to overcome, to become the best versions of themselves.
So not about brute force, but about striving, evolving, reaching your full potential.
Exactly. And that's where the death of God ties back in.
Yeah.
Without a preordained purpose, without a set of absolute values, we have the freedom and the responsibility to create our own meaning.
It's a lot of pressure.
It is.
But it's also kind of exciting, right? This idea that you're not bound by any limitations.
Right.
That you have the power to shape your own destiny.
It's both exhilarating and terrifying. And that's really the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy, embracing the complexity and uncertainty of life.
I'm starting to see why you said he's still relevant today. We're all trying to figure out, meaning and purpose in a world that feels very chaotic and uncertain.
Absolutely. And we're just scratching the surface here. We haven't even touched on his ideas about eternal recurrence, his critiques of morality and religion, his views on art and culture. There's so much more to uncover.
Well, I'm ready for it. But I think for now, we've given our listeners a lot to think about. Let's take a moment to digest all of this, and then we'll continue our deep dive. Welcome back. We've been talking about some pretty heavy stuff with Nietzsche, like the death of God and the will to power. But I'm curious about his influences. Was he just kind of out there on his own, or did he draw inspiration from other thinkers?
He definitely carved his own path, but like all great thinkers, he was influenced by those who came before him. And one of the most important was Arthur Schopenhauer, a 19th century German philosopher.
Oh, yeah.
Known for his pretty pessimistic views.
Yeah, I remember him. Wasn't he the one who said that life is basically just suffering?
That's the one.
Yeah.
And he believed that this suffering was caused by this kind of blind, striving will that drives all of existence. And Nietzsche really wrestled with these ideas. He was fascinated by this concept of the will.
But it sounds like Nietzsche didn't completely buy into Schopenhauer's bleak outlook. He had a more, optimistic take on things.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Right.
While Nietzsche recognized the reality of suffering and struggle, he saw something more in this will. Remember the will to power we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Well, that's actually rooted in Schopenhauer's concept. But Nietzsche transformed it into something more dynamic and creative.
So for Nietzsche, it wasn't just about, endless striving and suffering. This will had the potential for something greater.
Exactly. He saw it as the driving force behind growth, creativity, self-overcoming. It's what pushes us to evolve, to reach for our full potential, to create meaning in a world that might seem inherently meaningless.
I like that. It's like he's saying, yeah, life is tough, but that's what makes it interesting.
Right.
That's where we find meaning and purpose.
That's a great way to put it. He saw struggle and overcoming as essential to human growth and fulfillment.
I'm also curious about his interest in ancient Greeks, especially Greek tragedy. I know our sources mention that he found something really valuable in those stories.
He was very drawn to Greek tragedy, especially the plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles. He saw in them a way of confronting the harsher realities of life, suffering, loss, betrayal, without shying away from them.
So not exactly light entertainment, but it sounds like he saw something really powerful in the way that the Greeks dealt with those difficult themes.
Absolutely. And he was especially fascinated by this duality of Apollo and Dionysus, these two major figures in Greek mythology.
Okay, so time for a quick mythology refresher.
Yeah.
Apollo, the god of reason, order, beauty.
Right.
And then we have Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and, well, maybe a little bit of chaos.
Perfect. And Nietzsche saw these two figures as representing these fundamental forces that exist within all of us. So Apollo is that rational, ordered side of ourselves, while Dionysus represents the primal, instinctual, often chaotic side.
So it's not about choosing one over the other, right? It's more about finding a balance.
Exactly. He believed that true human flourishing came from integrating both the Apollonian and Dionysian aspects of ourselves.
Okay.
It's about finding that balance between reason and passion, order and chaos.
And that makes me think about how so much of traditional Western philosophy really focused on reason and logic.
Yes.
Often at the expense of things like emotion and instinct. So it sounds like Nietzsche was advocating for a more holistic approach.
Exactly. He was interested in the fullness of human experience, not just the neat and tidy parts. He wanted to bring emotion, instinct, even the body, back into the philosophical conversation.
Makes me think about all the times that we try to, compartmentalize ourselves, suppress certain parts of who we are. Maybe Nietzsche's reminding us to embrace the whole messy package.
That's a great insight. He wasn't interested in creating a rigid system or set of absolute truths. He wanted to provoke thought, encourage self-discovery, and inspire individuals to embrace the challenge of creating their own values in a world without easy answers.
Which brings us back to those big challenging ideas, the death of God, the Übermensch, eternal recurrence. These aren't just abstract concepts for Nietzsche, right? They're meant to be lived.
Yes, they're meant to shake us out of our complacency, make us confront the fundamental questions of existence,
Right.
and ultimately help us create a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
That's a tall order. So for our listener who's maybe feeling a little overwhelmed right now by all of this, What's the one key takeaway about Nietzsche that you would want them to remember?
I think it's this: Nietzsche's philosophy is an invitation to self-creation. He's not offering a prepackaged set of answers.
Mm-hmm.
He's asking us to engage in that ongoing process of becoming who we are, to embrace the freedom and responsibility of shaping our own lives.
I love that. And it reminds me of one of those Nietzschean zingers that you mentioned earlier.
Oh, you mean become who you are?
That's the one. It really captures the essence of his challenge.
It does.
But of course, there's so much more to unpack here.
There is. We haven't even touched on his ideas about morality, his critique of traditional values, or his vision for the future of humanity.
Well, buckle up, listener. Sounds like this deep dive is about to get even more intense. We'll be right back to continue exploring the wild world of Friedrich Nietzsche. Welcome back. I'm telling ya, my head is still spinning a little bit from all this Nietzsche stuff. I'm starting to get why some people find him a little overwhelming.
Yeah, he can be a challenging thinker, for sure. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
But, I think that's part of what makes him so rewarding. He really doesn't shy away from those tough questions.
Right.
It's the questions that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of uncomfortable questions, let's talk about his ideas on morality. We've touched on this a little bit, but I think it's worth digging a little deeper into what he meant by that phrase, the revaluation of all values.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because that phrase can sound pretty intense, even a bit destructive.
Oh, yeah?
Like he's just trying to tear down everything we hold dear. But like a lot of Nietzsche's ideas, I think there's more nuance there.
Okay, so walk me through this. What exactly was he trying to revalue?
Well, he was primarily concerned with the systems of morality that had dominated Western culture for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
These systems that are often rooted in religion and tradition.
So like the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And Nietzsche argued that these systems often serve to suppress our natural instincts.
Okay.
To make us, more docile, more obedient.
I see. So it wasn't that he was saying things like compassion and shyness were bad in themselves.
Right.
But that the way they had been presented or enforced was maybe problematic?
You got it. He believed that these values had often been imposed on people as a way to control them, to keep them in line.
Interesting.
He called this slave morality.
Slave morality. And I'm guessing he wasn't a big fan of that?
No, not really. He saw it as a morality that was based on resentment, weakness, a fear of power. It values things like self-denial, humility, conformity, all things that he believed were ultimately life-denying.
Okay, I can see that. So if slave morality is the problem, then what's the alternative?
Well, he contrasts it with what he calls master morality.
Master morality.
And it's important to note that this isn't about literally being a master or a slave.
Right.
It's about two different approaches to life and values.
Okay, so what does this master morality look like?
What's characterized by self-affirmation strength, a celebration of life. It embraces power, creativity, individuality.
So it sounds like he's pushing for a much more individualistic approach to ethics.
Yes.
Where each person kind of defines their own values based on what they find meaningful.
Exactly. He believed that the truly free individual was one who could move beyond good and evil.
Okay.
And create their own values based on their own understanding of the world.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is. It's both liberating and challenging. And it's important to note that Nietzsche wasn't advocating for just a chaotic free-for-all.
Yeah.
He believed that this process of creating values should be thoughtful, deliberate,
Okay.
grounded in self-awareness, and a deep understanding of life.
So it's not about just doing whatever you want.
No.
But it's about consciously choosing what you believe in.
Exactly.
And then living in accordance with those values.
That's it. And this is where his concept of the Übermensch comes in again. Remember, the Übermensch isn't someone who's amoral or lawless. They are someone who has created their own values.
Right.
A new morality that is life-affirming and creative.
So they're almost like a trailblazer forging a new path for humanity.
That's a great way to put it. And for Nietzsche, this was the ultimate goal, to create a new kind of human being.
Wow.
Who could embrace the challenges of a world without God and create a more fulfilling way of life.
That's a big vision. But it also raises some tricky questions. I mean, if there's no objective standard of good and evil, how do we even know if our values are quote-unquote good or bad?
That's a question that Nietzsche struggled with himself. And there's no easy answer. He believed that the ultimate test of our values is whether they contribute to our growth, creativity, and flourishing as individuals.
So it's kind of an ongoing experiment. We try things out, we see how they work, and we make adjustments along the way.
Exactly. It's a process of self-discovery.
Yeah.
A constant evolution. And it's not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of honesty, and a willingness to constantly question yourself.
Well, I think we've done a lot of questioning ourselves in this deep dive. It's been intense, challenging, thought-provoking.
It has.
And I hope our listeners are feeling the same way.
I hope so, too. Whether or not you agree with everything Nietzsche had to say, I think just engaging with his ideas can be a really transformative experience.
Absolutely.
He forces us to think differently about ourselves, about the world, about what it means to be human.
Yeah. To wrap things up, is there one final takeaway from Nietzsche that you want to leave our listener with?
There's this quote from him that always comes to mind, and it might seem a bit surprising given, all the heavy stuff we've been talking about. But I think it really gets to the heart of his philosophy. He said, without music, life would be a mistake.
Without music, life would be a mistake?
Yeah,
I love that. It's so simple, yet so profound.
Right. And I think it speaks to something essential about Nietzsche. He wasn't just about, intellectual rigor. He was about embracing life in all its fullness, including its beauty, its passion, its joy.
I love that, Perfun. It's a beautiful thought to end on. And I think it's a great reminder that philosophy isn't just about these abstract ideas.
Yeah.
It's really about how we live our lives, the choices that we make, the meaning that we create. So to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep becoming who you are.